A spoiled man in an honest world was bound to either break or bend. The Carrington name had opened every door until today. The wind in Atlanta had a sharp bite that morning, cutting through even Malik Carrington's double-breasted cashmere coat. He stood at the curb outside the modest brick building with the faded sign that read, Southside Community Resource Center. His Italian loafers were not made for cracked sidewalks or unexpected puddles. A cold gust tousled his neatly styled waves, and he frowned, adjusting his scarf like it might shield him from everything unpleasant about this neighborhood. He checked the address on his phone for the third time. It hadn't changed. This was it. With a reluctant sigh, Malik stepped through the glass front door into a lobby that smelled faintly of peppermint and something chalky, baking soda maybe. The scent tugged at a memory. He didn't expect his grandmother's kitchen, where the counters were always dusted with flour and a kettle rattled gently on the stove. He pushed the thought away. The interior of the center was simple. Warm beige walls, folding chairs stacked neatly, a community bulletin board pinned with flyers, food drives, reading circles, job training workshops. It looked exactly like what it was, a place for people who didn't have much but tried their best anyway. Malik's tailored trousers suddenly felt out of place, like a tuxedo at a fish fry. A woman behind the reception desk looked up. Miss Louise, her name tag read. She wore a burgundy cardigan over a floral dress and gold-rimmed glasses that made her eyes look twice their size. Her smile was small but welcoming, and her gray curls were pinned neatly behind her ears. "Mr. Carrington," she asked, in a voice like warm syrup. "That's me," Malik said, clearing his throat, "though I'm not used to being called Mr. around here." Miss Louise chuckled. "We believe in manners, even if we're running on a tight budget." She stood, motion for him to follow. "Let me show you around before we start." Malik followed her through a narrow hallway lined with black and white photos of past community events, kids holding trophies, families at cookouts, elders at quilting circles. He noticed how everyone in the pictures looked genuinely happy, even though their clothes were simple and the backdrops unimpressive. That happiness, that unfiltered joy, made him uncomfortable. Miss Louise spoke as they walked. "Your shift today is 3 hours, helping set up for next week's Valentine's event decorations, lifting boxes, whatever Miss Robinson needs." Miss Robinson, he asked, already anticipating some cheerful, middle-aged volunteer who would want to bond over tea and stories of grandchildren. Our director, Louise, replied with a knowing look. "You'll meet her soon enough." They passed a classroom where 2 teenage boys were setting up folding tables. One gave Malik a curious glance. Another muttered something Malik didn't catch, but sensed was not complimentary. In the break room, a coffee pot burbled beside a tin of off-brand sugar cookies. Miss Louise offered him one. He declined. She didn't seem surprised. "You from this part of town?" she asked gently. Malik exhaled through his nose. "Not exactly." She hummed. "That explains the shoes." He looked down. "What's wrong with my shoes?" "They're too clean," she said simply. "Give it a week." They looped back to the lobby. "Miss Robinson should be here soon. You can wait over there." Malik sat stiffly in a plastic chair, scrolling his phone. No reception. Of course. 10 minutes passed. Then 15. Just as he stood to leave, the door opened, and in stepped a woman in jeans and a tan trench coat dusted with wind-blown leaves. She shook the cold off her shoulders, then looked up. Their eyes met. Jada Robinson wasn't what Malik expected. She was younger, sharper. Her posture said authority, but not the kind bought with money or privilege, the kind earned by navigating too many systems not built for her. Her eyes, warm brown and watchful, narrowed slightly as she sized him up. "Mr. Carrington," she said, voice level. He offered his hand. "You must be Miss Robinson." She looked at it, then back at him. Didn't shake it. "We need someone who supports the work, not supervises it," she said. And for the first time in years, Malik realized his name didn't buy him a smile. Malik blinked. For a moment, he wasn't sure he'd heard her correctly. No handshake, no warm welcome. Just that firm voice measured almost clinical. He was used to being greeted with admiration or fear. This was neither. Jada turned on her heel and walked through the main hallway, not checking to see if he followed. Instinctively, Malik straightened his coat and caught up. "You always greet new volunteers that way?" he asked, managing a tight smile. "I greet people based on how they show up," she said without slowing. "And you showed up like someone doing a favor, not someone who cares." He opened his mouth to reply, but closed it again. What would he say? That he was being forced to be here? That this wasn't his world, and he didn't care to be part of it? They entered the event room, a wide multi-purpose space with foldable tables stacked along the walls, a low stage at the back, and boxes labeled Valentine's 2023 scattered on the floor. The windows let in cold February light, and the linoleum tiles squeaked underfoot. "Help me move those boxes to the back corner," Jada said, pointing. Malik glanced at the nearest one. It didn't look heavy. Still, he hesitated, scanning the room like he might find someone else to do it. "Is there a dolly or a cart?" he asked. Jada raised an eyebrow. "We call that using your arms around here." He chuckled dryly, more out of disbelief than amusement. But he did it. One by one, he carried the boxes. By the third trip, he was breathing harder than he expected. She watched but didn't comment. As he worked, Malik found his eyes drifting toward her. Jada was efficient, moving fast, checking clipboards, making notes. She didn't perform for anyone. She wasn't trying to prove anything, which oddly made her presence stronger. It bothered him more than he cared to admit. "Where'd you learn to run a place like this?" he asked, half trying to sound casual. "Life," she said, eyes still on her list. He waited, expecting elaboration. None came. Malik rubbed his hands together. "You're not big on small talk, are you?" "Depends who's talking." Her words weren't cruel, just honest, and that honesty stung in a way no insult ever had. It wasn't personal. She didn't think about him enough for that. And somehow that was worse. Miss Louise entered a few minutes later, holding a tray with paper cups and a plastic thermos. "Break time. Y'all need something warm." "Thanks, Miss Louise," Jada said, grabbing a cup and nodding toward Malik. "He's working on his third box." "Lord bless him," Miss Louise teased, pouring hot cider into a cup. "Mr. Carrington, you want cinnamon or plain?" Plain is fine," Malik said, accepting the cup with both hands. The heat seeped into his palms. Jada leaned against the table, sipping hers. Malik stood near, unsure where to place himself. So Miss Louise said, settling into a chair, "You planning to be here more than one day?" Mr. Carrington Malik glanced at Jada, then at the older woman. "That's up to my father." Jada looked over, expression unreadable. "Your father made you come?" she asked. Malik nodded. "Thinks I'm too comfortable. Wants me to see how real people live." Jada tilted her head. "And do I what see us as real?" The question dropped like a weight in the room. Malik felt the heat of the cider fade. He looked at her, really looked this time, and saw a challenge. Yes, but also weariness. Like she'd had this conversation before, with too many people who never stayed long. "I'm not sure yet," he said honestly. Jada held his gaze a second longer, then nodded, like that answer was at least respectable. Miss Louise broke the silence. "Well, sugar, long as you show up with open hands and a shut mouth, you'll do just fine here." That earned a small reluctant grin from Malik. When the break ended, Jada led him through the supply room to retrieve string lights for the Valentine's dinner. The space was cramped and they had to turn sideways to pass each other. At one point, their shoulders brushed, and Malik caught a faint trace of her perfume, subtle, warm like cedar and orange peel. She didn't seem to notice, or maybe she just didn't care. "Where do these go?" he asked, holding up a tangled bundle of lights. Front hallway. We looped them across the beams like a canopy, she said. As they walked back, Malik spotted another photo on the wall, older than the others. A group of teenagers in bell-bottoms standing where the community center now stood. One girl in the center wore an afro and a defiant smile. She looked uncannily like Jada. "That your mom?" he asked. Jada paused. "That's me. I was 6. They had me out here marching for library funding." Malik blinked. "Wait, you're telling me this place has been around that long?" "Longer," she said. "My grandmother helped build the first version of it. People tried to close us down 5 times. We're still here." He nodded, humbled. "Guess it means something to you." "It means everything," she said softly. "Which is why I don't have time for people who treat it like a punishment." Malik looked away, guilty. "Point taken." Jada adjusted the clipboard under her arm and walked ahead. Malik followed quieter this time, still unsure whether he was earning her respect or just her tolerance. The rest of the afternoon passed in quiet work. Malik found himself sorting bins of paper hearts and faded garlands with glitter that clung to his coat. Occasionally Jada would give him a task, never unkindly, but never unnecessarily either. Her tone was brisk, professional. No softness, no attempts at friendliness. She moved through the space like someone who had memorized every inch of it, and maybe she had. He started noticing things he wouldn't have before. The way kids peeked into the event room waving at Miss Louise. How a man in a wheelchair near the door kept nodding hello to everyone, even those who didn't look back. How a young mother with a toddler on her hip balanced a grocery bag and a flyer while chatting with a volunteer about rent assistance. This world was loud in a different way, not with money or ambition, but with life. It buzzed under the surface like quiet resilience. Malik had spent his life above that current, floating on family wealth and expectation. But here he was, just another pair of hands, and that felt new. By late afternoon, his back ached slightly, not painfully, but noticeably. He hadn't lifted this much since college gym days, and even then someone else had usually done the heavy lifting. He stood near the doorway, stretching, when Jada approached with 2 steaming paper cups. "Truth," she said, offering him one. He raised an eyebrow. "Thought we weren't doing small talk." She didn't smile, but there was the faintest light in her eyes. "Consider it. Necessary hydration." He took the cup. Hot cider again, faintly cinnamon this time. "Thanks." For a moment they sipped in silence. Through the window the sky was shifting, clouds streaked with lavender as the sun sank low behind the rooftops. Malik broke the quiet. "You really don't like me, do you?" "I don't know you," Jada replied calmly, "but I don't like what you represent." He nodded, accepting that. "The rich kid slumming it. The rich kid who thinks being here is punishment," she corrected. "And this place deserves better than that." Her words weren't cruel. They were carved from experience, smoothed by repetition. She'd said them before, in different forms, to different people. They came from knowing how easily outsiders dropped in, then disappeared. Malik looked at her, feeling a flicker of something unfamiliar. Not attraction, though she was beautiful, in a grounded, don't mess with me kind of way. It was something deeper, a desire not to be the version of himself she'd already filed away. "I didn't ask to come here," he said quietly, "but I'm here now." Jada studied him for a moment, then nodded once. "We'll see what you do with that." The front door creaked open, and a teenager poked his head in. "Miss Robinson, the choir group's here. They need the piano key." Jada handed her cup to Malik and jogged off without another word. He watched her go, strong, deliberate, grounded. Miss Louise appeared at his side. "You survived," she said with a smile. "Barely." She chuckled. "Don't take her too personal. Jada's been running this place since she was 24. She's had to fight for every coat of paint on these walls. Don't expect confetti for showing up." "I don't," Malik said, and he meant it. He looked around again at the bulletin board filled with hand-drawn posters at the smell of peppermint still lingering near the kitchen, at the sound of laughter filtering in from the hallway. It was all so normal and humbling. Miss Louise followed his gaze. Funny thing about places like this, they don't need saving, just someone willing to roll up their sleeves. Malik didn't respond. Instead, he pulled out his phone and typed something into his notes app. A reminder. Stop assuming you know the whole story. As the last of the decorations were stored and the tables wiped down, Malik gathered his coat and stepped outside into the crisp evening. The sky had darkened to a deep navy. He shoved his hands into his pockets, exhaled slowly, and for the first time in a long while, didn't rush to his car. And for the first time in years, Malik realized his name didn't buy him a smile. The wrong hands in the right place still leave fingerprints. Malik arrived the next morning with a new plan: say little, do less, and wait this whole thing out. A few weeks couldn't be that hard. Show up, nod politely, keep his distance. Maybe even impress Jada with how low maintenance he could be. He walked through the front doors with his signature coat still buttoned up, sunglasses in place, though it was cloudy. The center smelled faintly of lemon-scented cleaning spray and something warm baking. He passed by Miss Louise, who was arranging a small table of pamphlets. Back again, she said, without looking up. Like a bad penny, Malik replied dryly. She gave him a look over her glasses that might have been amusement or warning. A clipboard waited for him at the front desk. Neat black ink spelled out his assignment for the morning records room. Box sorting and filing. Ask Deshawn. Malik sighed. Filing. At least it wouldn't involve confetti or crepe paper. He made his way to the back hallway, where a faded sign read Staff Only. The records room was colder than expected and smelled of paper and dust. Deshawn stood near a tower of cardboard boxes, arms crossed, wearing a hoodie with the center's logo. Younger than Malik, probably mid-20s, he had the kind of presence that didn't require volume, just sharp eyes and an unreadable face. You're the Carrington guy, Deshawn said, not offering a hand. Just Malik is fine. Deshawn didn't move. These boxes need to be alphabetized and refiled. The cabinets are marked. Don't mix up the intake forms with the medical waivers. You mess up, we lose real info. Got it? Crystal, Malik said, trying to keep his tone light. The task was simple in theory. Open boxes, read forms, file them by last name. But the folders were warped, the handwriting inconsistent, and Malik's patience thinned quickly. Within 30 minutes, he had 2 paper cuts, 1 broken fingernail, and a headache forming between his eyes. Deshawn lingered near the doorway like a supervisor who didn't trust the temp hire. After the 3rd time, Malik asked which forms belonged in which bin. Deshawn snapped, "You don't have assistants to do this kind of thing for you?" Malik looked up. "I'm not helpless." "Sure," Deshawn muttered. "You just dress like you're headed to court." Malik forced a laugh. "Old habits, or just old money?" The silence that followed was not friendly. A knock on the door broke the tension. Jada leaned in, tablet in hand. "Malik, come with me. Time for something different." He didn't argue. Anything to get out of that room. She led him down another hall and into a cozy room with mismatched chairs and a whiteboard. The smell of coffee and lavender soap filled the space. Seated in a semicircle were 5 women, gray hair, floral scarves, big earrings. All of them looked up when he entered. "Ladies," Jada said, "this is Malik. He'll be observing today's life skills session." One of the women, round-faced with pink lipstick that bled slightly past her lip line, patted the empty seat beside her. "Sit, sugar. We don't bite." Malik hesitated, then took the seat. "Now," said the woman, "you look like you never peeled a potato in your life." The group burst into laughter. Malik smiled politely. "That's a fair guess." Another chimed in. "Bet his nails cost more than my rent." "You're not wrong," he replied to another round of giggles. The teasing wasn't cruel, It was playful, seasoned with affection, but it made him feel for once like a curiosity on display, a pet project. He sat through their chatter, their jokes, the stories that looped and overlapped like music from a different time. At some point, someone passed him a picture frame, old black and white. A crowd gathered in front of the center, the year 1971, etched in the corner. "That's me, third from the left," the lipstick lady said. "We were fundraising to fix the roof back then." Malik stared at the photo. "You've been coming here that long?" She nodded. "This place raised my kids, then my grandkids. Thought we might hang it up on the wall again. Let the young folks remember." "It's beautiful," he said more sincerely than he expected. Malik stayed quiet for the rest of the session, content to observe. The women spoke of recipes passed down from mothers who worked 2 jobs, of husbands long gone, of aches in the knees that told them more about rain than any forecast ever could. They laughed loudly and without shame. Malik found himself listening more intently than he expected. After the session ended, he slipped back into the hallway, unsure of where to go next. The center pulsed with motion, volunteers setting up tables, teens walking past, with clipboards, someone unloading cans of soup into a pantry. Deshawn spotted him again. "Come on," he said, gesturing with a slight jerk of his head. "Lunch set up." Malik followed him into the center's modest kitchen. It was a narrow space with a humming fridge, a well-used microwave, and cabinets labeled in faded marker. Trays of sandwiches sat waiting. Deshawn handed Malik a pair of gloves and pointed toward the plates. "Set the portions, 2 halves per person. Chips go on the side." Malik raised an eyebrow. "Is there a specific chip alignment policy too?" Deshawn didn't smile. "People come here hungry, man. They don't need sarcasm with their sandwich." For once, Malik bit his tongue. He washed his hands, pulled on the gloves, and started assembling trays. His fingers fumbled with the flimsy plastic wrap. Every movement felt clumsy. Deshawn moved with practiced ease, stacking cups, wiping down the counter, filling pitchers of tea. "You always this neat?" Malik asked. "Grew up with a single mom who cleaned houses. I learned to fold hospital corners at 7. Malik blinked. Hospital corners. Deshawn didn't answer, but he handed him a rag and said, "When you're done, wipe the table legs too. People miss those. Dust builds under judgment." They worked in silence for several minutes. Malik tried to mimic Deshawn's rhythm, though his back began to ache and his patience wore thin. He glanced toward the hallway, where the sound of laughter and conversation drifted in. "You actually like this place?" he asked. Deshawn didn't look up. "I respect it. Doesn't mean it's perfect. But people show up here when nobody else has their back." Malik wiped the edge of a tray, thinking. "I didn't ask to be here." Deshawn gave him a sidelong glance. "Nobody ever does. That's kind of the point." After lunch was served and cleaned up, Malik found himself outside near the back of the building. He leaned against the brick wall, arms crossed, watching the wind stir brittle leaves across the pavement. The air smelled faintly of fried food and cold concrete. Jada approached without a sound, a folder in her hand. "You disappear faster than the coffee does." "I needed air," he said. She didn't respond right away. She opened the folder, glanced at something inside, then looked at him. "Deshawn said you were helping." Malik gave a small shrug. "I tried." She studied him for a long moment. "Trying matters here, but so does humility." He exhaled through his nose. "Right, because I'm just some spoiled rich guy who thinks he's better than everyone." "You said that," she replied calmly. "I didn't." Her tone wasn't cruel, just honest, and that honesty stung more than he expected. He looked at her. "Why do you do this?" Jada closed the folder. "Because this place kept me alive when I was 16 and had nowhere else to go." Malik's brow furrowed. "My mom passed. My aunt didn't want me. This building, these people were the first to say I mattered." Her voice didn't tremble, but there was weight behind the words. "So I came back. I made it better." and I protect it." There was no self-pity in her voice, no performative martyrdom, just a simple truth. Malik nodded slowly. "I didn't know. You didn't ask." The words hung there between them, not unkind, but undeniable. The afternoon wore on, with Malik shadowing Deshawn again, this time helping organize a back closet stuffed with donation items, blankets, canned food, and an inexplicable number of holiday wreaths. Malik reached for a box on the top shelf and knocked over a dusty binder in the process. Papers spilled onto the floor. Deshawn sighed. "Careful, man. That's probably from the Carter administration." As Malik crouched to gather the pages, a voice behind him piped up, "Oh Lord, if it ain't the Carrington boy playing librarian." He turned to see a small group of older women entering the room. One wore a leopard print scarf, another had a cane painted with sunflowers. They peered at Malik with amused eyes. "Miss Gwen, please," Deshawn said, half laughing, half warning. Miss Gwen ignored him. She leaned on her cane and tapped the stack of old files. "We used to file these by hand, you know. No fancy cloud thing. Just fingers, patience, and a lot of coffee." Malik straightened. "I can't even find the front of the folder." That earned a chuckle from the group. One of them, Miss Lottie, stepped closer, holding something wrapped in plastic. "Here," she said. "I thought you might like this." He took it. It was a photograph, black and white, slightly creased. The community center decades ago, with hand-painted signage and a group of children gathered on the stoop. "That's from '71, she said proudly. "My brother built the fence with his own hands. You see that boy in the front? That's Deshawn's uncle. Mean as a snake, but he loved chess." Malik blinked the image, pulling at something deep in his chest. The grainy texture, the smiles, the worn bricks, they made the place feel like it had lived several lifetimes. "We'd love to hang it up again," Miss Lottie added, softer now. "Little memory never hurt a place." He nodded, fingers tightening slightly on the photo. But the moment didn't last long. From the hallway a commotion stirred. Raised voices. Malik stepped out and saw Jada near the front desk, arms folded, as she faced off with a man in a gray suit. It was subtle, but the tension in her jaw was unmistakable. "I told you we're not interested in commercial buyouts," Jada said calmly. The man handed her a brochure. "Your board should reconsider. Properties like this don't have price tags," she cut in. "Not for sale. Not now. Not ever." Malik's chest tightened. Something about the man's polished tone hit too close to home. He knew that language. He'd spoken it. The man noticed Malik. A fellow suit. Maybe you can talk some sense into your director here." Malik met his gaze. For a second, the old instinct kicked in. Negotiate, deflect, dominate. But then he remembered the laughter in the kitchen, the dust under the tables, the photograph still in his pocket. "She already said no," Malik replied, voice even. The man blinked. Jada gave Malik a curious glance, surprised but unreadable. Eventually the man sighed and turned away. "The offer stands," he muttered, walking off. Jada looked at Malik. "You didn't have to say anything. I wanted to." Before she could reply, Malik's phone buzzed. He glanced at the screen. His father. He stepped outside to take the call. "You've been there 2 days," his father's voice barked. "You ready to be done with this nonsense?" Malik hesitated. The sunlight slanted across the parking lot, glinting off the faded lettering on the community center's sign. "No," he said quietly. "Not yet." There was a pause. Then the elder Carrington snapped, "Don't get sentimental, son. You're there to learn discipline, not make friends." Malik hung up before he could say something he'd regret. When he walked back inside, Miss Louise stood at the doorway. She didn't speak, but her expression held a calm kind of knowing, like she'd seen generations of young men choose their roads. Malik looked at her. "Why does this place make me feel like I'm either the intruder or the missing piece?" She smiled faintly. Some truths don't come with directions. Then as he moved past her, she added, "You don't belong here, Mr. Carrington, but maybe that's exactly why you're here," softening edges one awkward smile at a time. Even steel, when warmed, can bend slowly awkwardly. The late afternoon light slanted through the high windows of the community center, casting long golden bars across the dusty floor of the old storage room. Malik stood in the middle of it, sleeves rolled up, tie loosened, staring at piles of forgotten boxes and sagging shelves like they were an unfamiliar jungle. His usual sharp-pressed look had begun to fray, literally. A smudge of something unidentifiable streaked his white cuff. He sighed, unsure whether it was coffee dust or the remains of whatever had once lived in the shoebox, labeled Holiday Crafts, 1998. Miss Louise had handed him a clipboard that morning and pointed him toward the room with a polite but firm, "Some of this might be worth saving sugar, but most of it just dust with good memories." He didn't complain, not out loud at least. Malik had spent the last hour sorting through old soccer trophies, tangled extension cords, and an entire drawer's worth of mismatched mittens. At some point, he unearthed a stack of black and white photographs, each one curled at the edges but still vibrant with laughter. There were cookouts and choir practices, smiling teens in oversized graduation gowns, and rows of folding chairs filled with community members clapping like they believed it mattered. He ran a hand over one of the frames. A woman stood front and center, beaming with a baby on her hip. Both their faces glowed with something he couldn't name. He read the year scribbled on the back, 1976. That photograph was older than he was. He glanced up. The far wall of the storage room was empty, just cracked plaster and faded tape marks where other memories had hung. Impulsively, without planning, without his usual second-guessing, Malik picked up the hammer he'd found in a drawer and began looking for nails. By the time Jada walked in, he'd already hung 3 of the photographs in a neat row. She paused at the door, eyebrows lifted in surprise. "No one asked you to do that?" she said evenly. Malik turned, resting the hammer against his leg. "I know." Jada stepped inside, her heels silent against the scuffed linoleum. She walked over and examined the photos without speaking, her arms crossed loosely over her chest. Malik waited, awkward but stubborn. After a moment, she nodded once. "That one's Miss Eleanor," she said, pointing to the smiling woman. "She used to run the center before me. People still talk about her pound cakes." He smiled a little. "I didn't know where to put them. Figured this wall could use some history." Jada looked at him, something unreadable in her gaze. "It already has it. You're just helping it show." Their eyes met briefly, gently, and then, as if the moment were too fragile to hold, she turned away and reached for another frame on the floor. "You missed one," she said, handing it to him. He took it carefully, fingers brushing against hers for a second too long. Before either of them could say more, a shriek of laughter echoed down the hallway, followed by the unmistakable sound of small feet running full speed. "Malik," a voice called out, full of glee and no hesitation. "Malik, guess what, Zoe?" The 8-year-old tornado burst into the room like joy personified. She had a glitter-covered paper crown on her head and a glue stick in one hand. Her braids bounced with every step. Before Malik could prepare, she wrapped herself around his leg in a hug that nearly knocked him off balance. "You're just like the guy in that movie." She beamed up at him, cheeks dimpled. "You know, the one who was grumpy but then helped everybody and got a dog." Jada blinked, then burst out laughing, a real laugh this time, unguarded and melodic. Malik, stunned by both the hug and the laughter, muttered, "I don't know whether to say thank you or apologize." Zoe shrugged and skipped off, leaving glitter in her wake. Jada looked at him again, her smile still faint on her lips. Maybe she's got a point. Malik stood there for a second longer, watching the doorway where Zoe had disappeared. Her energy, her trust, it disarmed him in a way Wall Street meetings and corporate power plays never had. Jada leaned against the doorframe now, arms relaxed, that trace of a smile still tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're better with kids than I expected," she said. Malik arched an eyebrow, brushing invisible dust off his slacks. "Is that a compliment or a warning?" She chuckled. "A bit of both." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was comfortable, like old jazz humming in the background of a diner booth. Malik wasn't sure how it had shifted, but it had. They started working together, not talking much, just hanging more of the old photos. Every once in a while, their hands would brush or their eyes would meet, and neither would pull away too fast. At one point, Jada found a dusty box labeled Volunteer Photos. Inside were dozens of Polaroids volunteers over the years, some smiling, some awkward, some clearly caught off guard. She held one up. "That's my mom," she said quietly. "Back when she used to run the after-school programs." Malik leaned in. The woman in the photo had the same eyes as Jada, warm and alert. "She looked like someone who didn't take any nonsense," he said. "She didn't," Jada replied with a half smile, "but she made killer hot chocolate." They pinned the Polaroid next to Miss Eleanor's frame. Malik noticed how carefully Jada smoothed the tape edges, how her fingers lingered, like the photo deserved reverence. He finally asked, "What keeps you here?" She hesitated. "Sometimes. It's the only place that reminds me who I am." That stayed with him even after she walked out to answer a phone call. Malik found himself alone again, but this time he didn't feel out of place. He picked up another frame and held it to the light. In it, a group of young men stood arm in arm laughing. One of them looked like Deshaun. Malik smiled, shook his head, and reached for a nail. He tapped the nail gently into the wall with a rubber mallet Miss Louise had let him borrow earlier. As he steadied the frame and stood back to check the angle, he heard soft footsteps returning. Jada reappeared with 2 steaming mugs in hand. "You look like you could use a break," she said, offering him one. Malik accepted it with a nod, surprised by the familiar scent. "This smells like nutmeg." She raised an eyebrow. "Miss Louise's recipe, with a little cinnamon." He took a careful sip. The warmth spread through him, slow and calming. "Your mom would have approved." Jada smiled, really smiled this time. "Yeah, she probably would." They leaned side by side against the wall beneath the newly hung photographs. For a while they just stood there, sipping and looking. It was a quiet that didn't beg to be filled. Zoe's laughter echoed down the hallway again, followed by a few kids running past the door. Malik didn't flinch this time. He simply watched, content, something unfamiliar loosening inside him. Jada glanced at him. "You're different from what I expected." He laughed under his breath. "Let me guess. You thought I'd show up in a suit, bark orders, and vanish after 2 days." She gave him a look. "That's exactly what you did." Malik shook his head, chuckling. "Fair enough." She nudged him with her elbow, playful but measured. "You're still figuring it out, but you don't seem as allergic to effort anymore." "High praise," he replied, mock bowing. They returned to hanging the last photo, a large one of an outdoor block party from the 80s. It took some maneuvering, especially to find the right spot. Jada held the frame, while Malik reached above her to straighten it. Their arms brushed. She adjusted her grip. He didn't move. Their hands met on the same corner of the frame, hesitated, then stilled. Jada didn't pull her hand away, and neither did he. The weight of a name is only heavy when you try to carry it alone. Malik stood quietly near the edge of the recreation hall, where tables were now draped in soft pink cloth and jars of glittered hearts waited to be arranged. It was a Saturday morning, cool but sunlit, and the entire community center buzzed with life. Children were tracing Valentine's cards in crayon. Miss Louise was orchestrating the hanging of a paper heart arch near the door, and someone had turned on a Motown playlist that made the whole place hum like a living heartbeat. But Malik felt like static in a warm room. He had shown up early, surprising even himself, to help with the Valentine's event. Jada hadn't assigned him anything yet, so he lingered near a stack of unopened supply boxes, unsure whether to touch them or wait for instruction. His usual suit jacket had been replaced with a simple navy crew neck, and jeans still new, still pressed, but the kind of normal he thought might help him fit in better. Jada was across the room laughing gently with one of the elderly ladies as they debated whether the plastic roses looked too funeral-like for the kids' table. She hadn't looked his way once. Maybe she wouldn't. Then came the voice. "Excuse me, are you Malik Carrington?" He turned to see a woman with bright eyes and a press badge. Her tone practiced her smile too symmetrical. A photographer hovered behind her, already raising the lens. Malik blinked. Yeah," he answered slowly. "Wonderful," the woman said, offering her hand. "Allison from Wealth Monthly. We're doing a piece on second-generation leadership in philanthropy. You're Richard Carrington's son, correct?" What a great narrative, giving back at the grassroots level. Malik froze. From across the room, Jada's posture stiffened. Her smile disappeared. She didn't move toward them, but her eyes never left the scene. The older women nearby began whispering behind cupped hands. Malik didn't answer the reporter. He stepped slightly to the side, shielding his face from the camera. "I'm not doing interviews today," he said tersely. "Oh, sure, no problem," Allison replied, lowering her voice. "We'll be around for a few more shots. You're a natural for the cover if you're interested later." She pivoted away with an airy nod, leaving Malik in the center of too many stares. He glanced again at Jada, whose gaze now held something unreadable. Part surprise, part disappointment. Without a word, Malik moved toward the wall, where the Happy Valentine's Day banner lay folded beside a ladder. He picked it up and began unrolling it with forced focus, hoping it might distract from the weight that had just dropped into the room. A few feet away, a man in a work shirt leaned toward his friend and muttered, "Knew he wasn't just here for the coffee and crafts." The words were low, but Malik heard them. He always did. And for the first time since arriving at the center, he felt smaller than his name. Miss Louise approached from behind with quiet steps. In her hands was a small hand-folded card, neatly decorated with glitter glue and red ribbon. She offered it without a word. Malik took it with a puzzled look. Inside, written in cursive shaky from age but steady in intention, were the words, "Some names are earned, not given." Malik stared at it for a long moment. Then something inside him softened almost. He held the card as though it were made of porcelain, afraid that moving too fast might shatter something delicate, something he couldn't name. For all the expensive stationery and engraved invitations in his life, nothing had ever struck him the way this handmade card just had. The lettering was imperfect. The edges curled slightly, but the message was clear and quiet, like a whisper that carried weight. Some names are earned, not given. Malik slid the card into the inside pocket of his jacket without a word. He nodded at Miss Louise, whose eyes sparkled with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. Then he climbed the small ladder and began pinning the banner above the welcome table. The chatter around him continued, but it had changed. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was the subtle hiss of curiosity turning to judgment. Phrases like "rich boy Carrington kid" and "PR stunt" slipped through the cracks. He kept working, jaw-tight eyes focused on making sure the letters of Happy Valentine's Day didn't droop. When he finally stepped down, Jada was standing beside him. Not too close. Her arms were crossed and her expression unreadable. "I didn't know we had guests from Wealth Monthly," she said flatly. "I didn't invite them," he answered. "They knew your name," she replied, voice steady. "They knew your father's name." "I can't help what people assume when they hear Carrington," he said. Maybe she said, pausing. "But you can help what they see when they look at you." Malik opened his mouth to respond, then shut it. She was right, and that's what made it worse. He had worked all week, showed up early, smiled at kids, picked glitter off his jeans, and yet one reporter's appearance had unraveled it all. I didn't come here to impress anyone, he said at last. Not even you, good Jada replied quietly, because the people here don't need impressing. They need showing up. She walked away, leaving him standing beneath the banner he'd just hung, surrounded by construction paper hearts and the sour scent of disappointment. He made it through the next 20 minutes in a haze. He helped pass out hot cocoa packets, arranged chairs for the bingo table, even smiled politely when an older gentleman asked if his Bentley came with a chauffeur. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. When Jada announced it was time for the children's craft contest, Malik slipped away. He wasn't sure where he was headed, only that he needed space. He exited through the back door and stepped into the cold morning light. The sun was low and gold, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The wind tugged at his sleeves. Across the street, the reflective windows of the vacant hardware store mirrored him. Back, a man with expensive shoes and tired eyes. Malik stared at the glass. He wasn't sure what hurt more, being seen or being misunderstood. Inside, laughter rose with the scent of glue sticks and paper doilies. Through the frosted glass of the community center's side window, Malik could just make out Miss Louise lifting a small boy up to tape his Valentine on the wall. Her scarf fluttered like a flag of quiet resilience. He should have felt proud. He had helped organize this, carried boxes, stacked chairs, even untangled light strings. But none of it seemed to matter now. The face in the glass didn't look like someone who belonged here. It looked like someone playing the part, wearing decency like a borrowed jacket that didn't quite fit. The door behind him creaked open. Miss Louise didn't say anything right away. She simply stepped out onto the sidewalk, a shawl wrapped tight around her shoulders. Her breath came out in soft clouds as she glanced over at him. You know, she said after a moment, when I was your age, we didn't wait for people to prove themselves. We just waited. Gave them the space to show who they were. Malik didn't answer. Miss Louise tilted her head toward the street. Your father ever come to one of these? He scoffed. My father thinks charity is writing a check in a heated suite. She didn't sound surprised. And you think showing up makes you different? That one stung. I'm trying, he said quietly. I know, she replied softer now. But trying's not the same as staying. Malik looked at her, then back at the glass. Do you think Jada hates me? Miss Louise smiled a little. Jada doesn't hate easy. She just loves hard. That kind of woman needs proof, not promises. He nodded slowly, folding his arms as the wind pushed through the hem of his coat. They stood there like that for a minute, two shadows leaning into the cold. Then Malik said, I'll come back tomorrow. Finish the banner outside. It's crooked. Miss Louise nodded once. Good. You saw it. As she turned to go, she reached into her coat and pulled out another small card. Zoe made this for you, she said, handing it over. Says you remind her of a superhero. Just without the cape yet. He took it. The card was lopsided, colored wildly outside the lines, and spelled his name wrong. It made him smile anyway. When the door clicked shut behind her, Malik stayed there staring at the sidewalk, the card his reflection. He wasn't sure what hurt more, being seen or being misunderstood. Where truths settle and hands reach back, hearts don't stay hardened for long. The door creaked as Malik pushed it open, unsure if anyone would be glad to see him or if they even noticed he'd left. The familiar scent of ginger and cinnamon wrapped around him like a worn blanket. The center was quieter now, the energy of the Valentine's event replaced by the slow rhythm of a regular weeknight. He caught sight of Miss Louise folding tablecloths in the main hall, humming to herself. She looked up, raised an eyebrow, then gave a small nod, as if to say, you know where to go. Malik stepped deeper inside, heading toward the back where the storage room waited. He hadn't forgotten the crooked banner or the look Jada gave him before she walked away. He'd played that moment over in his head all weekend, wishing he'd said something else, or more, likely said nothing at all. The hallway lights were dimmed. Only the warm glow spilling from the kitchen ahead gave the place life. As he approached, he heard soft clinks of ceramic and a faint jazz melody crackling from an old tabletop radio. He stopped in the doorway. Jada stood by the counter wearing a faded hoodie and tying cellophane around a stack of cookies. Her sleeves were rolled up flour, dusting her forearm like snow. "You're late," she said without turning. Malik hesitated. "Wasn't sure I'd be welcome." "You're not," she replied evenly, "but the pantry's not going to organize itself." He exhaled something between relief and humility. "I came to help. I also owe you an apology." She finally looked at him. Her expression wasn't soft, but it wasn't sharp either. "I'm listening." Malik stepped into the kitchen, took a breath, and let his hands rest on the back of a chair. "The reporter wasn't my idea. I didn't know she was coming. But I didn't exactly discourage it either. I figured a good article might get my dad off my back." Jada crossed her arms. "So this was just about family approval." "At first, yeah," he admitted. "But it's not anymore." Silence hung between them, filled only by the jazz playing low and the timer ticking on the oven. "I grew up thinking everything was about image," Malik continued. "Appearances, headlines, donations with names on buildings. This place, this community, it doesn't work that way." Jada raised an eyebrow. "No, it doesn't. I've been arrogant. I know that now." He paused. "But I'm not here to impress anyone anymore. I want to stay, help, start over." Jada studied him for a moment. Then, to his surprise, she slid a mixing bowl toward him. "Start with folding these into bags." He smiled and reached for the parchment paper. The tension eased just a little. They worked in comfortable silence, the kind that only came after the first bricks of mistrust had started to crumble. Malik clumsily folded the wax paper over the still warm cookies, his fingers stiff not from the heat, but from a nervousness he didn't want to name. Jada smirked. "You ever folded anything that wasn't a bank statement?" He chuckled softly. "First time for everything." She reached over, adjusted the way he'd tied a ribbon. "It's not about perfection, just care." He nodded, the gesture surprisingly heavy. "That makes sense." A soft knock tapped at the kitchen entrance, and a wiry woman with silver curls and deep smiling eyes stepped in. She moved slowly, leaning on a carved wooden cane, wrapped in a knitted shawl of faded lavender. "Evening," she greeted, voice honeyed with age. Jada straightened. "Ms. Mavis, you're up late." "Couldn't sleep," the woman replied. "Figured I'd check if any of those ginger snaps made it past the children." Malik instinctively stepped back, brushing flour off his sweater. "Evening, ma'am." Ms. Mavis gave him a once-over eye sharp despite her soft tone. "You must be the Carrington boy everyone's been whispering about." "I guess I am," he said, with a respectful nod. She chuckled. "Well, at least you didn't deny it. That's a good start." Jada pulled out a plate and set a few cookies on it. "You want tea too, Ms. Mavis? Only if it's that spicy ginger kind you make." While Jada poured the tea, Ms. Mavis turned her gaze back to Malik. "You been to the back room yet?" "The storage." He shook his head. "Was planning to start tonight." She smiled. "That room holds more than just broken chairs and old banners. It holds stories." Malik tilted his head. "I'd like to hear one." Ms. Mavis sipped her tea first, then said, "Your father, Joseph Carrington, came here once long before you were born. I remember because he didn't wear a suit that day. Looked out of place like you did the first time." Malik's brow furrowed. "My father was here. I never heard about that." "No one did," she said. "He came, quietly asked what we needed, and then left a check that kept this center alive during its first year." Jada turned toward her, surprise flickering in her eyes. "He donated anonymously," Ms. Mavis nodded. "Refused to have his name on anything. Said he wasn't doing it for glory." Malik looked stunned. "That doesn't sound like him." Ms. Mavis's voice softened. "People are more than what they become. Sometimes we forget who they were trying to be. He swallowed hard the weight of that landing somewhere deep. Why didn't anyone ever tell me? Because some stories aren't shouted, she said. They're whispered to the ones ready to hear. He held the card as though it were made of porcelain, afraid that moving too fast might shatter something delicate, something he couldn't name. For all the expensive stationery and engraved invitations in his life, nothing had ever struck him the way this handmade card just had. The lettering was imperfect, the edges curled slightly, but the message was clear and quiet, like a whisper that carried weight. Some names are earned, not given. Malik slid the card into the inside pocket of his jacket without a word. He nodded at Miss Louise, whose eyes sparkled with the kind of understanding that didn't need words. Then he climbed the small ladder and began pinning the banner above the welcome table. The chatter around him continued, but it had changed. It wasn't laughter anymore. It was the subtle hiss of curiosity turning to judgment. Phrases like rich boy Carrington kid and PR stunt slipped through the cracks. He kept working, jaw-tight eyes focused on making sure the letters of Happy Valentine's Day didn't droop. When he finally stepped down, Jada was standing beside him. Not too close. Her arms were crossed and her expression unreadable. "I didn't know we had guests from Wealth Monthly," she said flatly. "I didn't invite them," he answered. "They knew your name," she replied, voice steady. "They knew your father's name." "I can't help what people assume when they hear Carrington," he said. "Maybe," she said, pausing. "But you can help what they see when they look at you." Malik opened his mouth to respond, then shut it. She was right, and that's what made it worse. He had worked all week, showed up early, smiled at kids, picked glitter off his jeans, and yet one reporter's appearance had unraveled it all. "I didn't come here to impress anyone," he said at last. "Not even you." "Good," Jada replied quietly. "Because the people here don't need impressing. They need showing up." She walked away, leaving him standing beneath the banner he'd just hung, surrounded by construction paper hearts and the sour scent of disappointment. He made it through the next 20 minutes in a haze. He helped pass out hot cocoa packets, arranged chairs for the bingo table, even smiled politely when an older gentleman asked if his Bentley came with a chauffeur. But the smile didn't reach his eyes. When Jada announced it was time for the children's craft contest, Malik slipped away. He wasn't sure where he was headed, only that he needed space. He exited through the back door and stepped into the cold morning light. The sun was low and gold, casting long shadows across the sidewalk. The wind tugged at his sleeves. Across the street, the reflective windows of the vacant hardware store mirrored him back, a man with expensive shoes and tired eyes. Malik stared at the glass. He wasn't sure what hurt more, being seen or being misunderstood. A name rewritten with hands, not ink, leaves a deeper mark. The morning of February 14th broke over Atlanta with golden light that made the frost on rooftops look like sugar. The air was brisk but kind, the kind that made people want to step outside, breathe a little deeper, maybe even smile at strangers. Inside the community center, the usually quiet halls were alive with movement. Folding tables unfolded. Balloons in shades of deep red and soft cream floated near the ceiling. Handmade signs fluttered in the soft indoor breeze from old vents. It was Black Love Day, and Malik Carrington was everywhere at once. "Hey, Deshaun, can we shift the book table a little to the left? The sun hits it weird around noon," Malik called out, rolling a poster tube under one arm, sweat darkening the back of his gray sweatshirt. Deshaun blinked, then nodded. "Yeah, sure, boss." Malik grinned, not missing the sarcasm but also not letting it rattle him. "Not your boss, just your friendly, over-enthusiastic coordinator for the day." He ducked into the main room and unfurled a banner that read, "Celebrate love. Celebrate us." Below, in smaller hand-drawn letters, Black Love Day. Community first. It wasn't printed by some marketing team downtown. He'd drawn it himself. The lines weren't perfectly straight. The paint bled a little at the edges, but it was his. his work, his hands. By noon, the courtyard bustled with energy. A local jazz trio played near the steps. Children ran between booths, their laughter bouncing off the brick walls. Elders sipped spiced tea under heaters, bundled in scarves, watching with warm eyes. There were stations for face painting, handmade Valentine card making, and even a corner for storytelling, run by none other than Miss Louise, who wore a sparkling brooch and the widest smile. From across the crowd, Jada watched Malik work. He moved with ease now, not as a guest, not as someone trying to prove a point, but as part of the heartbeat of the place. He knelt to pick up paper cups, wiped down sticky chairs, greeted everyone like he knew their names, and he did. A child tugged on his sleeve and asked if he was on TV. He laughed and shook his head. Not yet, but today's got the makings of a hit episode. Jada shook her head, smiling despite herself. Near the sound system, Deshaun approached Malik, holding a small, neatly folded package. "Hey!" He started scratching the back of his neck. "So? I might have been an ass. You know before." Malik raised a brow. "Might have," Deshaun snorted, then offered the package. "Figured you earned this. Welcome to the crew." Malik unfolded the item. It was a button-up shirt, crisp and simple, but embroidered on the chest was the modest logo of the center, a tree growing from joined hands. He ran his fingers over it, silent for a moment. "Thank you." Deshaun gave a quick nod and walked off before it could get emotional. Just then, a pair of small arms wrapped around Malik's waist. "Mr. Malik," Zoe shouted, eyes gleaming. "Come see my face, I'm a butterfly." He turned to find her cheeks painted in purple and gold wings sweeping across her temples. "You look magical," he said sincerely, crouching to her level. She beamed. "I saved you a cookie. Best Valentine gift I've gotten in years." From across the yard, Jada's gaze lingered on him. Something in her chest shifted. Not the flutter of romance, not yet, but a deeper warmth. A quiet realization that she wasn't looking at a Carrington heir anymore. She was looking at Malik, and maybe she was beginning to see him. As the afternoon sun slanted across the courtyard, the atmosphere took on a kind of golden hush, a calm in the middle of joy. Jada found herself standing just off to the side of the stage, arms crossed but face soft, watching Malik as he adjusted a mic and cracked a few jokes with the crowd. It wasn't forced. It wasn't about him. And that's what startled her most. The man who had once waltzed in wearing Italian leather shoes and a face carved in stone was now barefoot in spirit, barefoot in service. He laughed with Miss Louise like they'd been teasing each other for years. He complimented kids on their drawings like they were art collectors. He didn't hide in corners anymore. He belonged. And yet he never used the Carrington name, not once all day. She wandered toward the refreshment table, helping a young girl refill lemonade. As she turned, Malik was suddenly beside her, holding something behind his back and wearing the faintest smirk. "Busy?" he asked. "Always," she replied, though her tone was light. He shifted nervously, then presented a small square box. Nothing fancy, the kind you might find in a vintage shop, with peeling corners and soft velvet. "This isn't what it looks like," he said. "It's not jewelry." She quirked an eyebrow. "Then what is it? Something more valuable?" "I hope." Jada took the box, her fingers brushing his. Inside, nestled in soft cloth, was a single photograph, black and white, slightly curled at the edges. It was of her. Not posed, not prepared. Just a moment he'd captured on an old Polaroid earlier that week. She was laughing with Zoe, head thrown back, joy written across her face like sunlight. Her breath caught. "This? When did you take it?" she asked softly. "Tuesday. You were helping the kids paint. You looked—" He stopped himself. "You looked like someone who should never have to pretend to be strong. You just were." Jada's throat tightened. Her fingers curled around the frame, the weight of it more emotional than physical. No diamonds, no declarations, just Her. Seen. Held. I didn't know I needed this, she whispered. He stepped a little closer. I did. Around them the music played on an upbeat soul tune drifting from the corner speaker. Kids shrieked over sack races. Laughter swirled on the breeze. Yet, in that small bubble of stillness, there was only the two of them. A breath, a pause, a knowing. Malik rubbed the back of his neck. I know we got off to a bad start, and I know saying sorry isn't always enough. But I'm not leaving Jada, not unless you ask me to. She shook her head, blinking fast. I don't want you to. Their eyes met, and for once the silence wasn't awkward. It was sacred. In the distance, Miss Louise tapped the mic and called everyone to gather for closing remarks. The Valentine sun dipped lower shadows stretching long, but the courtyard glowed. Malik turned back to Jada. Come with me. She nodded, sliding the photo gently back into its box and holding it to her chest. And together they walked toward the stage, not with grandeur, but with something softer. Earned, real. The crowd gathered, forming a semicircle around the makeshift stage, where Malik stood with Deshawn and a few other volunteers. String lights flickered overhead, casting a warm glow that softened even the hardest faces. It felt like home, no longer a building, but a heartbeat. Deshawn nudged Malik gently. You sure you want to say something? Malik took a breath, looking over the community, at faces that once greeted him with doubt, now watching with cautious hope. He stepped forward. I used to think a name could carry me through anything, he began, voice steady. That Carrington meant doors would open, people would listen, and mistakes wouldn't follow me. He paused, eyes scanning until they landed on Jada. But a name doesn't mean a damn thing unless your hands are part of the work, unless your feet walk beside the people, not ahead of them. There were murmurs of agreement, nods from the older women seated near the front. Miss Louise wiped a tear discreetly. Malik continued. This center gave me something no amount of money ever has. It gave me a mirror and the courage to not look away. A beat. Today isn't about me. It's about all of you. And I'm just grateful I got to be here to carry chairs, to hang signs, to find a reason to care that had nothing to do with my last name. A quiet, steady clap started from Zoe, holding her butterfly-painted face high. Then more joined in. A wave of applause, not out of politeness, but pride. Deshawn grinned and gave Malik a slap on the back as they stepped down. Jada was waiting at the edge of the crowd. I didn't know you had that in you, she teased, eyes glinting. Malik chuckled. Neither did I. She handed him a folded piece of paper, a Valentine card hand-drawn. Inside was a childlike sketch of two people standing under a tree holding hands. He recognized his suit and her glasses, both scribbled with careful lines. Below, in Zoe's handwriting, Mr. Malik plus Ms. Jada, one nice people. He laughed, then looked at Jada more seriously. It's been a while since someone called me nice. Well, she said, earn it a few more days, and maybe I'll say it too. Their fingers brushed, then laced. They stood quietly for a moment as the music began again, this time a slow, rich melody from a saxophone that curved through the evening air. I have something else for you, Jada whispered, turning toward the refreshment table. She handed him a small envelope. Inside was a copy of a donation form from years ago, anonymous, handwritten. From a friend. Amount $10,000. For hope, not legacy. Malik recognized the handwriting. It was his father's. Jada spoke softly. He didn't want credit. He just wanted it to exist. Maybe. He knew you'd find your way here. Malik folded the paper gently, the weight of history, family, and healing settling in his chest. Maybe I did. The music swelled, and without a word, Jada leaned in. Their foreheads touched, and time felt irrelevant. Around them, people danced, children spun in circles, and laughter lit the air like lanterns. And when they finally stepped back, hand in hand, the applause had begun again, Not for a speech, not for a name, but for the couple who had come through fire and misunderstanding and somehow found each other in the middle of it all. As they turned to walk toward the cleanup crew, someone called out, "Hey, Carrington, you staying for trash duty?" Malik didn't even hesitate, already got the gloves. And as he bent to lift the trash bag, Jada beside him, their fingers brushing again, a few voices murmured, with something like affection, something like pride. And for the first time, Malik didn't mind being recognized, not for his name, but for who he chose to be. Sometimes the deepest changes begin not with grand gestures, but with quiet acts like hanging a banner, listening to a neighbor, or offering a second chance. Malik didn't rewrite his legacy with money or fame, but with the kindness he gave freely and the humility he chose daily. In a world quick to judge, it turns out the heart can surprise us, especially when we stop hiding behind names and start building bridges with bare hands. Because true belonging isn't inherited, it's earned one honest moment at a time. If this story touched something in you, perhaps it's time to look around and ask who might need your patience today.